One day, the girl remembered the words of a man with whom she was closely acquainted, and then they clearly appeared before her eyes. These words were about the fact that God did not exist, and the girl understood that they could well have been true. If God really existed, then there would not have been such anger as hers or any grievances in this world. She, one fine evening, was sitting at a meeting with a dark-haired man, and not far from her lay a rather large but very beautiful dog. The girl was wearing a beautiful pink dress. Her name was Bianca, and she said she had heard that a man had been visiting a poker club in the Albaraba section. They also said that he secretly met with Lady Olivia there, and it was a rather long meeting, which is why many became interested in this matter. The dog seemed to understand every word she said. As soon as the girl started talking about it, she immediately began to look straight at Bianca. This made the girl feel a little uncomfortable, and she actually felt fear, because she knew that this breed of dog could kill her in an instant. Then the man suddenly turned to her and, smiling, said something. He thought that she didn't care about it. And after that, he asked if this really meant that she didn't like that he had a mistress. This man was truly narcissistic. Bianca didn't even look at him. She said that, of course, she thought it was his freedom, and she wasn't going to interfere with all this. The man then laughed and said that, however, she didn't care because she hated him, so he didn't understand why they continued this conversation at all. He said that she hated him just terribly, and sometimes it seemed to him that it even crossed all boundaries. Of course it wasn't like that. Of course she didn't hate Bogdan. She really didn't like it when he did things like that with others. They lived under the same roof for more than 7 years, but he brought a different woman home every year, and of course Bianca didn't like it. In the end, the 9 were still husband and wife, even if he didn't love her. The fact remained a fact, and she was incredibly hurt because of it. Then the man decided to change the subject of the conversation and asked about the results of her medical examination, which she had undergone quite recently. Bianca replied that there was nothing new. He laughed and said that if it was true, it was a great pity. Of course, it didn't look like a regret at all. Rather, it was like a happiness, and all because his wife couldn't get pregnant for all these years. And of course, for him, it was a great relief. He was really happy that when she went through the medical examination, it turned out that she couldn't have children anyway. And for some time they sat and talked about various things, and also drank tea. After some time, a maid came into their room. She turned to the girl and said that Lady Alice had already arrived, and also asked if she needed to be taken inside. Bianca was very surprised to hear this, but she thought about why this girl decided to come without warning. For her, it was really rude and strange. Then she got up from her place and immediately went to the rice. As soon as she went down, she saw that she was not alone. Next to Alice stood also, and Olivia. She was the lady of the Alvarado Hotel. Alice immediately frowned and said that, of course, the owner himself invited her, and it was their first time visiting the Duke's mansion, so she decided to see her off. She also said that since the Duke valued Olivia so much, she now, of course, had to be a frequent guest in this castle. Of course, Bianca was shocked when she heard this. She immediately told Olivia that she had been her best friend all this time and did not understand why she did this. But the girl, as soon as she heard the word friend, immediately laughed loudly and said that apparently the girl knew absolutely nothing and did not even suspect all this time. She said that if the girl had tried a little harder, then perhaps she would not have been rejected. But she did everything wrong, and for that reason, she had what she had. As soon as the girl heard that she was rejected, she could not believe it, because the Bank Lain, which was managed by her father, and the Leventus family were long-standing business partners. This was, of course, the reason for their wedding. And besides, her husband was soon going to invest a large sum in his father's business. Bianca thought about the fact that he had to discuss this topic at dinner even that day, and she couldn't believe that the girls actually said those words. Alice turned to her friend Olivia and suggested that they go and look at the mansion. The girl immediately giggled and said that she was very much in agreement since she saw no point in staying. Bianca couldn't believe that they just took her and threw her away so quickly. She thought it wasn't true, because the man continued to keep her close despite the fact that he didn't love her, and this meant that he had a good reason for this. However, at that moment, someone suddenly knocked down the door, and men in uniform immediately entered the room and said that they had to search everything down to the last drawer. As soon as Bianca saw all this, she immediately became very scared and started shouting loudly at them, asking what they were doing. The men, meanwhile, turned the mansion upside down from head to toe. They removed various objects, took out boxes, and threw everything on the floor. When she screamed at one of the men who approached her and asked if they even knew where they were, the man in uniform immediately said that it was an order from the chief of police to search the Duke's estate, so they were simply following orders, and it was all legal. After that, he looked at Bianca and said that her father, Mr. Vincenzo, had been arrested the previous night on suspicion of espionage. The girl, hearing this, was sincerely amazed. She immediately asked what he was saying. Of course, she could not believe that it could be true. But the man said he had spread false information, deceiving investors, and stealing the personal funds of members of the royal family. The man turned and began to leave, saying that the Duke had already testified as a witness that morning at dawn, so permission to search the estate had been received long ago. Bianca absolutely could not believe that Bogdan had given up all this and even had deliberately allowed it to happen. Of course, this was a blow below the belt for her. But before leaving, the man in uniform said that the person with whom Vincenzo Klein had last spoken the previous morning was indeed the Signora. And in the spring, for a spy, we have only one punishment, of course, the death penalty. For this reason, they immediately reported this to the girl, because she was his daughter. At that moment, Bianca's heart sank into her heels. She couldn't accept this fact. Her voice trembled. She said that it was all a misunderstanding, because neither she nor her father had done anything like that. But the man continued to speak. He said that her half-brother Alfonso was the finance minister of Ingrid, and asked if she meant to say that there were no connections between their family and the Ingrid government. Of course, Bianca thought that this could not be, so she decided to go to meet her husband. When he repeated the same words that the officer said, she of course began to protest. The girl shouted at him and said that this was a false accusation. He himself knew what an honest man her father was. However, Bogdan made a completely innocent expression and replied that he did not know this yesterday. Her father persuaded him to invest in Ingrid bonds. The girl was incredibly angry at that moment. She immediately asked the guy if this meant that he also doubted her father. But she began to defend him and said that he knew that he was not that kind of person, and asked if that was why the guy married her. And Ingrid. Tears appeared in Bianca's eyes. She grabbed Bogdan and asked him to protect her father, or better yet, to blame her instead of him. She would not have been able to bear his death. She continued to scream, saying that if he wanted it, then she could do absolutely anything because she needed her father to live. Bogdan then told her to live in seclusion for some time in the Soda monastery and wait until he came for her. Hope immediately began to play in the girl's eyes. She asked her husband if this really meant that he had helped sort out her father's case. Bogdan only replied that this was indeed the case, and at that moment, the girl felt a great sense of relief. She knew perfectly well that he could not doubt her father and was truly ready to help. At that moment, she finally burst into tears from happiness. She leaned against Bogdan's chest and asked him not to leave her, because she was incredibly scared. As soon as she heard the news about her father, her world turned upside down. In fact, ever since they got married and Bianca moved to a foreign country, namely, there wasn't a single day when she wasn't scared. But even in spite of all this, she still loved him. And at the moment he said those words to her, the girl again said how much she loved and cherished him. But at that moment, Bogdan just smiled and said that he was ready to come to her once a month. At least once every 2 months. He could definitely do it. At that moment, he took the girl's head in his hands and began to move in order to kiss her. But Bianca had a very good sense of smell, and she immediately felt the smell of gunpowder. Of course, the girl was very wary, but the man at that moment leaned against her and kissed her hard. That time, she cried in his arms, and after that, she was sent to that very monastery. And so, half a year has passed since that moment. Bogdan, as he promised, visited her in the cell every month, but even when she asked how the matter was progressing, he did not give her normal answers so that she could understand the whole situation. One day, when the girl was sitting in the temple and praying according to schedule, she suddenly noticed that someone had come. She immediately lifted her head off the floor and looked to the side. Bianca immediately saw a tall man standing in front of her. She could not see his face because the light was falling incorrectly. But the girl became a little worried and immediately asked who he was, because entry to this place was forbidden to everyone except the priest and the sisters. The man, meanwhile, handed her the sheets of paper and said that such tactlessness was not at all to his taste, but he assumed that she did not know anything, so he decided to be a little more polite with her. Then Bianca looked at the piece of paper he had given her and saw that it was a newspaper, and it said that Kleinbank had finally gone bankrupt. Also, in April, the day after Winchester's arrest, he committed suicide by shooting himself with a pistol. And after that, the creditworthiness of the Levantis house fell sharply, and he withdrew the entire deposit, amounting to many millions of pesos, after which the panic-stricken depositors began to withdraw their funds one after another. And even the branch in England went bankrupt. It was expected that this could have a strong impact on the country's economy. As soon as the girl heard this, she could not believe that her father had really died. She thought that if this happened the day after the arrest, then it meant that she had been deceived. Bianca then remembered that when talking to her husband, she smelled gunpowder from him, and now everything fell into place for her. The girl realized the fact that she had simply been brazenly deceived. But at that moment, the man who brought her these papers said a phrase in a foreign language. This phrase meant that there was no God. Of course, these words deeply sank into the girl's head, and when evening came, she was, as always, in her room. That day, her husband was supposed to visit her, and as soon as he arrived, he immediately said that she could leave with him because now everything was settled. Of course, Bianca knew the truth. She immediately asked Bogdan what exactly had been settled. In his opinion, did he really mean the death of her father, or the news of the collapse of her homeland's finances? The news that her brother, whom she had not seen for 7 years, simply took his own life. As soon as Bogdan heard all this, he became very wary and said that in a closed monastery it was impossible to receive newspapers or news, so he was interested in how she found out about this. He came closer to the girl and immediately asked in a cold voice who told her about all this. Bianca was simply horrified. She screamed at him and asked him to say that it was a lie. She threw newspapers and papers at him. The girl was like crazy. She screamed at him, asking why he locked her in this place because she, like a fool, believed him and thought that everything would be fine, that he would solve everything. But in the end, he betrayed her trust. Bogdan immediately grabbed the girl as she began to fall. He said that because of all this, she had hyperventilation, so she had to breathe deeper in order not to suffocate at all. Bianca immediately got out of his hands. She forgave him so that he would let her go, and also that she demanded a divorce. She hated him with all her soul. She hated his dog, his house, his country, absolutely everything. She kept throwing these papers around, and even Bill Bogdan. However, he said that he knew perfectly well that she hated him, but he still hired mortal lawyers to drop all charges against her. That's why he said that there would definitely be no divorce. Whether she wanted it or not, they would continue to be together. After that, the man sighed heavily and asked how she felt in general, because the doctor had said that she could most likely start to improve now. However, at that moment, Bianca took out a gun. She put it to her head and just stood there silently. When Bogdan saw this, he was very scared. His eyes widened. He looked at her with a surprised look and immediately asked what she was doing. But the girl did not answer this question. She in turn asked her own and asked why he married her at all. Tears also flowed down her cheeks, and she, looking straight into his eyes, asked whether he killed her father or not. Although she knew the answer to that very well, and also asked from the very beginning if he was going to use both her and him in his evil plans. If so, then she really didn't understand how he could do that to her feelings. Then Bogdan finally gave in and said in a rough voice that it was definitely he who shot her father and her family and her country. It was time for them to disappear, and that was precisely the reason he did it. He said that it had been decided 9 years ago that they hadn't had a happy time anyway, so he told the girl to just accept it and move on. He explained that she had to accept it the way he had accepted it. But Bianca certainly wasn't going to just accept the situation as it was. The girl screamed loudly again and said that she did not agree to this. He could no longer make a decision for her. so she pointed the barrel of the gun even closer to her temples in her head. At that moment, the girl was already seriously aware of the action she was about to take, and ultimately, she pulled the trigger and shot herself straight in the head. In fact, at the moment when that mysterious man came to her, she went to the altar and prayed. Bianca did not know whether God really did not exist, and all this was just in vain. However, at the moment when she was dying, she heard that phrase about God being everywhere. It was spoken in a foreign language. But even at the altar, she heard that phrase, and for that reason, she was able to kill herself so boldly. After the girl pulled the trigger, she opened her eyes again. Her whole face was covered in sweat. The girl had a strong heartbeat and a panic attack. She immediately sat up on the bed. The girl was breathing heavily and immediately wondered if everything she saw and lived through was really a dream. At that moment, Bianca remembered Alice and Olivia, as well as everything that had happened to her with her husband, and she convinced herself that she had shot herself right in the head. She clearly remembered the sound and still clearly remembered the feeling she had experienced after she did it. For this reason, Bianca realized that this could not have been just a dream. It was not at all like some plot she had made up in her head. For some time, the girl simply sat on the bed and breathed heavily. Not far from her, there was a mine burner so that she would not be cold. At that moment, a maid came into her room and immediately turned to the lady and asked if everything was okay with her. The maid explained that despite the fact that it was still very early, the girl had received a call, and that was the reason she had come. Bianca, hearing about the call, was very surprised and immediately asked what kind of call it was, and the maid answered that it was Mr. Winchester Klein who called. Hearing this, Bianca was very surprised because the Winchester was her father, which meant that since he called her, he was alive. She immediately stood up, ran to the phone, and picked up the receiver. Everything was making her tremble. She immediately asked if it was really her father. On the other end of the line, his voice was heard. And indeed, Winchester was Bianca's father, and he, hearing his daughter, was immediately happy and said that he was very glad to hear her. The man had a very cheerful voice. He immediately turned to her, calling her a heroine, and also asked if he had woken her up by accident. So he said that he actually brought her a gift from England, but there were so many of them that he just decided to warn her in advance because it could shock her, because he simply could not stop and not buy all these wonderful things for his beloved daughter. He also said that there were too many of them, and for this reason, they did not even fit in the house. But at that moment, the man heard his daughter crying on the other end of the line. He immediately panicked and asked if Bianca had heard his girlfriend, who immediately said through tears that she missed him incredibly, and at that moment could barely say anything at all. The man was really panicking. He immediately asked what happened. When she didn't answer, he immediately said that he would come to the Duke's mansion right then and there. He had to see her. Winchester was incredibly panicked. He was surprised that she burst into tears out of the blue, and he really had to come and check if everything was okay with his own eyes. He also told Bianca that her husband had a dinner planned with investors that evening anyway, so he would like to be there and would have to come to her very soon. At that moment, as soon as the drunk heard about the planned dinner, she immediately became scared and asked her father what year, month, and day it was. The man was a little surprised by such a sharp question from his daughter, but he had no problem naming the year, month, and day. Then he heard the answer from Bianca, who told father that he could not be present at the dinner. The man, hearing this, was sincerely amazed. However, Bianca screamed and told him to leave Vienna right then and there. It was mortally necessary, and she really wanted him to listen to her. In fact, Bianca knew that she died on the first day of October of that year, and that day was exactly 6 months before it happened. For the past 6 months, she had not forgotten the day when she had spent the morning awkwardly drinking tea with her husband. The day when a trusted friend brought her Bogdan's mistress and mocked her right to her face. She didn't even suspect then that her husband could become the killer of her own father. It was that day when she cried and clung to him, truly trusting his words. Bianca immediately told her father to stop dealing with the great aristocrats in the Seine for a while, until she had settled all the issues. He was not to come in the spring. She asked him to carefully review the already concluded contract. Of course, she understood that it all sounded absurd, but he should not ask questions, but simply do as she said. At that moment, Winchester simply said that he was ready to do it. If she said so, then it meant there was some reason, and he trusted his daughter. He thought about the fact that she was, after all, the daughter of Klein, and this meant that he was ready to believe her and just wait, following all her instructions. As soon as Bianca heard this, she was incredibly grateful to her father. She immediately thanked him, and her soul became calmer because she knew that he listened to her. After some time, the girl had already changed her clothes and was ready for the meeting. You see, since that day was really the same day that was 6 months ago, then it was the last chance to change everything. She stood by the window for a while, and tears came to her eyes. She was no longer going to allow the same thing to happen to her as that time. She simply did not want such a fate for herself. Now Bianca knew the whole truth, and for this reason, it should have been easier for her after some time. She left the room and turned to the maid named Hina. She asked the maid to tell the man to come specifically to her room. Hina was very surprised by this statement and immediately said that the Duke had not yet returned, so she could not convey this message. Hearing this, Bianca was genuinely surprised and immediately asked if he hadn't been here since yesterday. Bowing, the maid said that it was indeed so. He left for the Soto Monastery early in the morning from the Alborota Hotel. Then Bianca thought about this monastery. It was precisely the place where she was hiding on the orders of her husband. She didn't understand why her past had changed. She hadn't even started anything yet, but the plot no longer matched. Then she told the maid that the original plan was to have dinner at our place, and asked why he had then gone to a completely different place. Hina looked a little sad, and immediately answered the lady that she didn't know, unfortunately, why the Duke changed his mind. Bianca thought about the fact that the round trip from the Matral Monastery to Soto would take about 10 days. So she asked the maid to immediately call the locksmiths who were the best in the capital. After that, the girl went to the office and began to review the papers, where the butler burst into her room and said that she could not do this. The man shouted at the drunk and said that without His Majesty's permission, no strangers were allowed into the office, so he asked her to leave the room immediately. But the girl looked at him with an icy gaze and told him to just shut his mouth and leave the room and not bother her. She waved her hand in his direction and said that he was only distracting her. The butler was very surprised to hear about this. He said that she was throwing around such rude words and it hurt his personality. He told the lady that she still had to maintain the dignity of a Levante, but Bianca looked at him with a cold-blooded gaze, as if she were ready to strangle him on the spot. But the butler smiled and said that his lordship was supposed to return very soon that day. He had business that needed to be settled, so he certainly would not stay long. In fact, this man was Samuel Otero. He was the butler who, during the 7 years of marriage, constantly spread various dirty rumors about Bianca. One summer day, when she was 17 years old, she came with her father on his business, and that was when she first met Bogdan. At their second meeting, she received an engagement ring, and on her 19th birthday, having come of age, she took and married this man. When she, still young, married abroad and was clumsy, the first one who started spreading rumors about her was the butler Samuel. He talked about everything with the maids, talked about how the girl should maintain her dignity as a duchess and all that sort of thing. Now Bianca realized that he didn't just hate her, he knew that she would soon become an unnecessary woman anyway, and so he constantly undermined her authority within the castle. Then the girl suddenly saw a wall in the room that was covered with curtains, and she immediately headed in that direction to see what was there. Of course, Emile immediately ran after her. He told the senior that she should not go there under any circumstances. Under any circumstances. Bianca, without listening to him, opened the curtains and then saw that there was a huge safe there, and she suddenly became interested in what was inside. Since he tried so hard to escort the girl away from this place, she simply had to find out what was there. But the butler shouted at her and said that this place was only accessible to the Duke, and in any case, she would not be able to even understand what was there. So it was pointless. She knew nothing at all about politics and economics, so he didn't understand why she was so persistently trying to find something in her husband's office. But Bianca replied that he had completely forgotten that she was also from the Levante family, and at that moment, she handed him her engagement ring. The woman said she was the daughter of a banker, the sister of the Minister of Finance, and Ingrinda lived for 7 years as one of the greatest aristocrats of the spring. And if he was going to talk about her qualifications, he could have just brought the divorce certificate right away. Upon hearing this, Samuel immediately panicked. He understood that he had no right to speak in such a way. The man got very angry, so realizing that he couldn't do anything there, the guy just left. He met with his assistant and said that he really wanted this day to pass as quickly as possible, because then he would be able to get rid of this probably nagging woman. Samuel still couldn't understand where His Highness had gone, because he was so needed there. One of his assistants also said that he also hoped for all this. Then, with Emil asked if the news was really all that came from the hotel manager, that he just unexpectedly left for the hotel. The guy was sometimes afraid of the senior butler. She immediately said that this was certainly true. He left without even having breakfast. Therefore, Samuel ordered him to first send a message to that place. And when His Majesty arrived, he could immediately report on the situation that was happening in the mansion. Bianca called her assistants at the right time to open the safe. Samuel himself wanted to tell His Highness that their operation called Canary had encountered problems. Bianca was soon able to find in his office a hidden list of spies who had been sent to the secrets by the royal family. State's review of public investments of the city dossier of the father and brother over the past few years, their actions and behavior, even reports on political views, everything was on paper. The plan in which the royal family and the Levante clan were uniting to destroy her hometown of Ingrad. This operation was called Operation Canary. Bianca found out about all this simply by being in the man's office and with the help of the safe that she found. The girl also concluded that all these documents that were related to the operation were found in this safe, which meant that this was indeed a seriously thought-out plan by the man. For the past 7 years, Bianca had always wanted to believe that even though he didn't love her, he at least had some kind of affection for her. However, now she understood that it was stupid to hope for all this. What was more important for her at that moment was to stop this stupid and terrible operation. Her husband withdrew all the millions of sand that he kept in the Klein Bank, under the pretext that the bank manager Vicenza was an Ingrid spy. As a result of trust in the bank, the Klein simply fell, and the nobles began to withdraw deposits en masse, which led to the collapse of the whole business. She understood that even if they took it from the bank, it should not affect his credit rating, so she needed to come up with an excuse. Bianca immediately thought about divorce. She really decided that a dirty and outrageous divorce could save her from this situation and help her. A personal matter that had nothing to do with the bank loan could have been the reason for her leaving this position. However, Bianca wondered what the reason could be, since the palace and the aristocrats alone, even these secret documents, could not be the reason for her divorce. She understood that something more reliable and good was needed. But at that moment, she suddenly heard some strange sounds outside the window and immediately came closer to check. And when Bianca looked there, she immediately realized that she did have a main reason for the divorce, and it was precisely because of her husband's mistress. Even the royal family would be powerless against such an ironclad argument. So Bianca was very happy about the arrival of Alice and Olivia. She waited for a while outside the door and counted the numbers in order to calm down and go out, just in time, and that's when she realized that it was time for her to go out. The girl opened the door. The young ladies, as soon as they heard this, immediately became very scared. They looked at Bianca and came closer, asking if everything was okay with her. But the girl got ahead of them. She turned to Alice and asked what had happened, since she had not received any news of her arrival. The girl immediately laughed and pointed towards Olivia, saying that the gentleman had invited her to this place, and that was why she had come with her to accompany him. Bianca, hearing this, made a very surprised expression on her face and asked if it was true that they had come to meet the Duke. But she, asking for forgiveness, said that he was not at the estate, so she offered to serve them tea so that they could wait for him for a while in the living room. She pointed to the place where they were supposed to go. Of course, Olivia, hearing this, was very surprised. She thanked her for it, and Bianca asked Alice to take the girl to the living room because she could get lost on the way. Alice, meanwhile, immediately wondered why the girl was so calm. But Bianca asked Alice to stay with her because she still needed to talk about something. As soon as the girl heard about the important matter, she immediately asked what she meant, and the girl asked if she really knew what could happen that evening. She sighed heavily and said that she had accidentally overheard the servants' conversation and that she was very worried. so she decided to consult with her since they were best friends. And as soon as she saw the forced smile on Alice's face, she immediately understood that it was true, so she was even interested in what kind of excuse the girl would come up with. But then Alice suddenly moved closer to Bianca and said that she certainly knew this, and also asked if Olivia had really told her. With a smile on her face, she said that when that day came, she would no longer be seen in Martel. When she returned to prison, she would simply have to be removed. This was decided quite a long time ago, and as soon as Bianca heard this, she was very surprised. She looked at her friend and asked what she was saying. But the girl then waved her hand and said that it was probably a scam because she didn't understand whether Bianca really thought that Levantress was right for her instead of the Duchess. In any case, it was her destiny, and if she had said it in advance, she could have helped. But Bianca interrupted her and said that it was already really very interesting. She told her friend that she had said that divorce was her destiny and that she was therefore interested in why Alice was suddenly so interested in it. Then the girl looked at her friend and said something. She thought she had some important key, but she ended up not knowing anything as it turned out. She slowly began to approach her and said that the greatest tragedy she could think of was just a divorce. Alice did not understand at all what the girl was telling her, but Bianca wondered if that meant the girl had just wanted to set her up for the past 7 years. She had always been there and supported her. When the girl couldn't get pregnant, her friend was there. She always didn't understand why her husband ignored such a beautiful girl like her. When Bianca answered her that it was more of a business than a marriage, the girl told her that being an unloved wife was such a misfortune. After that, she pointed out some photos to her and said that she accidentally saw her husband secretly meeting with Miss Olivia. In fact, Bianca didn't even want to look at these photos, but she simply handed them to her. The girl said that poor Bianca was in a terrible situation and did not understand how her life could be so sad. But Alice then smiled at her head right in the eyes and said that the girl should not worry because she was next to her. She always pretended to be worried, but even then, smiling, she noticed that something was wrong. Bianca came very close to the girl and said that her misfortune was funny and amusing for Alice, and that her friends certainly shouldn't have acted like that. Then Alice laughed nervously and said that of course it was funny, and she didn't understand what the problem was. If the girl was not an aristocrat, she became a duchess, then she should suffer exactly as much as she received. She said that she thought it would be quite fair, but she didn't even have time to finish this sentence because Bianca was not going to tolerate all this any longer, and she simply took and hit the girl on the cheek. As soon as her friend saw this, she immediately started yelling at her, asking if she really did this seriously. The maids who were standing nearby were also surprised. She screamed at her, asking if she had gone crazy and how she dared to do such a thing. Alice did not understand at all what had happened to her friend. She was now completely different. Bianca was not going to answer her. She turned to the maids and said that Alice should have already left, so she asked them to accompany her. At that moment, she finally knew for sure that it was not Alice who had the reliable information, but Olivia. And for this reason, she was not going to waste any more time on her. But she was still grateful to her ex-girlfriend because her inferiority complexes would have been excellent evidence for her. And all because now the girl had in her hands photographs of her husband Bogdan hugging Olivia, and this could become ideal evidence for a divorce. Some time passed since then, and Bianca came to Olivia's room. They were brought tea, and the girl asked her not to refuse and not to be shy. The girl thanked her and said that she could wait for the Duke alone, but Bianca, of course, was not going to let her do that. She told her that an invited guest cannot be left alone. These were elementary rules of etiquette, so of course she could not break them. Olivia herself looked at this woman and understood perfectly well that she was planning something, but she could not understand what exactly. Bianca broke their slight silence and asked if she often stayed at the Alborota Hotel. The girl replied that after all, it was her workplace, so it was only natural that she was there often. And then suddenly, the girl switched to more personal questions and asked if he had been kind to the girl. Olivia said with a smile on her face that he was delicate and always affectionate. And the girl was also polite and said that she understood everything, which meant that he valued her since he had such an attitude. The woman smiled and said that of course it was so, that what she had imagined for his lordship was not just drinks and smiles. She was giving him something much more valuable. And then suddenly Bianca asked, could it really be information, for example? But Olivia laughed and said that, of course, she was giving him the true love and embrace of a generous woman that he so valued. At that moment, Bianca laughed loudly. The girl was very surprised and even hurt. She asked why she treated her like that. And the girl asked her for forgiveness. He said that it just seemed to her that she wasn't laughing at all. But this was not at all the case, because of course Bianca could not believe in true love, and the embrace of a generous woman was not suitable for a man like Bogdan. She continues to laugh. She told the girl to meet as much as she wanted with her husband. She didn't mind. But that day he definitely won't come back, because she heard that he had gone far away. Hearing this, Olivia was very indignant. She suddenly stood up and said that this could not be, because it was a very important day. But Bianca replied that it was today that he left, and he definitely did not intend to return. She looked at the girl and said that she knew perfectly well the fact that this was the day she would be dumped. Seeing the surprised expression on Olivia's face, she told her not to pretend as if she didn't know anything. She said that she knew everything, that he was preparing for a divorce, so she didn't have to worry about saying anything unnecessary. Olivia, hearing about the divorce, immediately smirked and thought that the girl probably didn't know anything about the canary operation yet, which is why she said so. Bianca, meanwhile, said that some were saying that His Majesty was not expected to return for at least 10 days. She also said that when he returned, she would tell him to go to the Alvarado Hotel and asked Olivia to keep him there as long as possible. The woman, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what she meant. Bianca said, smiling, that she no longer aspired to be a duchess at all, and if Olivia gave her time to prepare for the divorce, she would help her take this place because she knew that the girl really wanted it. As soon as Olivia heard this, she immediately smiled and said that now she understood why the Signora was so condescending towards her. Of course, Bianca was indulgent, because their affair was supposed to be the perfect reason for her divorce. The most amazing proof of betrayal was that he was caught red-handed, and that is why Bianca had such an attitude towards this girl. But Olivia also now understood the position of this lady. If she left voluntarily, it would even be to her advantage. For this reason, she agreed to such a plan of action. She said that she understood everything. And after that, she asked if she needed to meet him at the hotel in 10 minutes. And Bianca said that if it came to that, it would be better if she also took into account the train schedules. She said that she absolutely believed that the girl could easily seduce him, after which the drunk came up to her and hugged her tightly, which greatly surprised Olivia. The girl looked at her in surprise and immediately asked why she was behaving like that. And Bianca replied that she wanted to support her. She really wanted this girl to have everything different from hers. When some time had passed since then, Bianca was already in her room. She listed the names of the maids and asked her to find out which of them were still in the capital, because she would like to meet them in person. The maid immediately understood everything and left the room, and Bianca thought about the fact that all of Bogdan's previous lovers were from Delgado Street. And besides, 3 of them worked at the Alvarado Hotel, and all this was really very surprising. But Bianca realized that in Elgrad, especially in the hotel, something was hidden that the man needed. And that woman also wanted to give him some information, because Olivia would not have come just like that, and would not have been so disappointed as soon as she heard that he was not supposed to be there anytime soon. She decided that this information could be about someone who could be connected with this hotel, and immediately thought about the person who came to her in the monastery and passed on all the information about what was happening outside. But Bianca knew she couldn't get her hopes up too much, so she just decided to turn off the lights and go to bed early. The girl knew that she had to go to Mass the next day, so she had to wake up early for that. She fell asleep quite quickly because the day had been tiring. Many hours had passed since then, and that morning, Bianca went straight to the church to sit in place. Before everything started, people sat and talked among themselves. They were discussing the very fact that a special person was supposed to come to this Mass. Someone had seen him greeting the Holy Father in the chapel, but for some reason, he had not yet appeared in the hall itself. The girls said that he wanted to be excommunicated from the church, but this was not approved, and so he stayed there. One of them said that it would be really cool if he came more often, because he always sat somewhere in the corner of the street, so the aristocrats almost never got to see him. The lady who was sitting near Bianca said that she agreed with her Hotel Alborota. This is a world exclusively for men. However, she asked her friend if they had heard that he didn't like the church, and therefore they didn't understand why he had come to this place at all, since it was contrary to him. Bianca, meanwhile, was very happy because she could not even imagine that they could suddenly run into each other like that, and considered herself very lucky. Then the door to the church finally opened, and the most mysterious man of high society, Vesna, walked in. He was a fair-haired guy with a muscular build, and his name was Duke Jagger. The service went quite calmly, and without incident. When it ended, Bianca stood among all the people who gradually began to disperse. Of course, after the place she would have liked to see him again, at least from afar. There were too many people, and she unfortunately lost sight of him. She really felt very sorry that she was never able to look at him again. And when Bianca was about to leave, a man suddenly bumped into her shoulders. He pushed her so hard that the girl couldn't even stay on her feet and began to fall to the ground. But fortunately for her, Yegor was nearby. He grabbed the girl by the waist and didn't let her fall to the ground. Smiling, he told her to be careful, because she could get seriously hurt. This man really was incredibly handsome and memorable. Bianca stood there for a while, with him hugging her around the waist, but she said she would definitely be more careful next time, after which he finally let her go and left. After what happened, the girl was impressed and thought that perhaps this was the day that was destined by fate itself, and everything was supposed to happen exactly like this. Immediately after this, Bianca went directly to the priest. She just wanted to talk to him about something, asking for forgiveness. She asked him to stop. The man was a little surprised that she came. He immediately said that the place was already finished and asked how he could help her in that case. Bianca replied that she would very much like to confess and asked if he had free time for this. Of course, the priest did not dare to refuse her. The girl immediately went to a special room for this. However, she did not suspect that at that very moment, Yegor was sitting next to her. He sat there because he wanted to rest a little before leaving, because if that old priest noticed him, he would start bothering him again. The man noticed that someone had entered the second booth. He was very surprised, because he thought that at such a time, everyone had already left and he would be able to be alone. But at that moment, a special window opened so that they could hear each other, and the guy decided to play along. He immediately said in a rough voice that the girl should confess to God. Bianca was silent for a while. After that, she turned to her father and said that she had committed suicide. But thanks to a miracle of God, she had returned to life from the other world. She immediately asked if it could have been just a dream or a real miracle. In fact, Marquis Erbetu was the only son of Princess Adriana, the most beloved monarch of the Vicena people. However, his father had many different rumors going around. It was no secret that the princess was in the last months of pregnancy when she married the previous marquis. 28 years later, and still after the death of Princess Adriana and the marquis, the identity of his true father still remained unknown, so Yegor was a so-called mystery, and she met this man twice in the past. The second meeting was on the last day of her previous life. Bianca had a strange feeling, so she had a request for this man. She was sure that he could give her what she wanted. That's why, before she shot herself, she talked to Yegor and asked if he had any guns by any chance, since it was from him that she took the weapon. Thus, he became something of a benefactor for her, and when Bianca confessed, she said that she didn't care whether it was a miracle or a dream, or whether she had simply gone crazy. What was important was the fact that she had returned. And for this reason, she was not going to live as before. She dedicated her past life to her husband and family, but in the end, she received nothing in return, only betrayal from his side. So Bianca was fully intending to destroy her husband this time. The man who had absolutely everything now had to lose everything and go to his death, suffering more than anyone else. She wanted him to experience the same feelings that he caused her, the pain that he made her feel. That's exactly what Bianca wanted in this life. The man sighed heavily and said that the lady had come to confession not intending to repent, so it was impossible to receive forgiveness. He could not even read a prayer of repentance in this case. But Bianca replied that everything was fine. She had already decided that she would go to Hellfire and had resigned herself to her fate. Then Yegor was very surprised and asked why she had come to him for confession if she already knew her exodus. The girl, after a short silence, said that God had returned her to the past, and she thought that she should have told him how she wanted to live again. She believed that he should be aware of this. Igor said that he understood everything and asked if she really thought that he was ready to look at her dark and secret intentions. But Bianca replied that the Almighty God had already known everything in advance from the moment he gave her a new chance, and in any case, the one who was listening to her confession now was not a priest. Igor, hearing this, was amazed. He did not understand how she found out about this, and simply grinned, thinking that this girl was really very interesting. When she asked from what moment he listened to her confession, the man did not lie and said that it was from the very beginning. He didn't even ask how she knew he was a priest, since his words didn't sound like those of a priest. And Bianca also added that she knew his voice, so she figured it out easily. At that moment, she stood up and was about to leave, but she saw that a man through a small window extended his hand to her. For some time, she doubted what she should do. However, then she put her hand in his, and Yegor pulled her palm closer to himself and kissed it. After that, he let go of the girl's hand and said that he was interested in this phrase, that she knew his voice, so he asked when they had time to talk. But the girl replied that he wouldn't have remembered it because it was very short-lived, so most likely he didn't keep this information in his memory. But Yegor said that it was a voice that could be forgotten and asked if she knew who he was. But Bianca only asked in response what he himself thought. Then, the man with a smile on his face asked if it was time for him to leave, but before that, he said that he was interested in her. She was interested in revenge in her thoughts. At that moment, Bianca immediately realized that this was quite enough, the man who stood at the top of power in this country and sat through the wall, and she knew that if she made him an ally, then revenge would become much easier for her. She followed him, intending to somehow persuade him. But when she met him again, Bianca realized that in fact she just wanted to tell someone this and feel the power of these words. So the girl thanked him for it and thought that perhaps it was an intrusive interference for him. But if it weren't for him, then in fact she wouldn't have even found out anything. She could not die or start a new life because for her it was like salvation. So Bianca folded her hands together and said that divine grace would come to him. Thus she wished him all the best. After that, she said a phrase in the language that Yegor spoke, and she said exactly that the Lord was omnipresent. As soon as the man heard this, he was sincerely surprised, because something like this had never happened to him before. Some time passed from that moment, and the priest came down to listen to the girl's confession. However, he noticed that Bianca was already leaving, and this surprised him a little. He assumed that most likely she had simply changed her mind, and therefore had some free time. However, then behind him he saw Yegor, who was rising from below. He immediately turned to the Marquis and asked how he ended up at confession in the first place. The man smiled and said that he had met the priest just in time, and asked who the girl who had just come out of the booth was. Of course, the priest was very surprised by such a question. He sighed heavily and said that her face was hidden by a veil, so he himself could not see it. But he also warned the boy that even if he had been able to see, he certainly would not have said anything. In any case, the non-priest who was listening to the confession was thus committing a grave sin. He asked the Marquis if he really wanted to be in the Vatican immediately for the trial, but the guy showed absolutely no interest in this conversation. The priest yelled at him, saying that he would simply be shaking in the Vatican, and asked if he really wanted to relive those previous trials. As soon as Yegor heard about this, he immediately asked the guy to stop, because he had not been listening to her on purpose. And besides, she herself knew everything as soon as she entered, and this, of course, interested the guy even more. He stood and smiled as soon as he said this phrase. The priest was simply furious. He told the Marquis that in this way he would truly incur the wrath of heaven, and then he would be in trouble. But Yegor answered in a completely calm voice that if God wanted to punish him, he would have done it a long time ago, so he did not worry too much. He also said that in fact the guy would not have let him be born at all. He knows exactly how he was born, but the priest, hearing this topic of conversation, immediately told him to behave quietly and not to talk about it. But Yegor continued. He said that, considering the fact that his own father was still alive, it seemed that his sins were not yet enough for heavenly punishment. In fact, from birth, he was vicious, and therefore he did not understand at all what the difference would be if another crime were added. He was really very interested in the aristocrat with a beautiful voice, whose marriage was not going well and was soon to fall apart. He would really like her to come back, because he was really interested in getting to know this girl better. He decided that he would wait until fate itself brought them together. But then Yegor thought about the fact that finding her himself would be very interesting and exciting for him, so he was ready to do it. Ultimately, after visiting the cathedral, Bianca had been preparing for the divorce ever since. She thought out a detailed plan and prepared everything so that it would go well. She put important documents in order and collected everything that could serve as evidence. But one factor still bothered her. All the other evidence was certainly in place. Only the savings certificate, so she could not find it, was the savings certificate of deposit of Levante. In the Klein Bank, it was for 5 million pesos, as far as she remembered. On the day of the wedding, she put it along with the marriage certificate on the bookshelf in the office. However, now it is unclear how this happened. But she had to act for this reason. She could not find this paper in any way, so she knew that she had to find it at any cost. It was very important. At that moment, someone knocked on Bianca's door. She immediately allowed them to enter and thought that the first step could be a meeting with Bogdan's former lovers. And one of his former lovers just happened to come into her office. Her name was Stephanie. She immediately came closer to the girl and asked if she had called her. Bianca smiled and immediately said that it was all really like that. She invited her to sit down and immediately moved on to discussing the matter. The girl said that some people were saying that she was quite close to her husband about 2 years ago, and as soon as Stephanie heard this, she immediately became wary. But Bianca smiled and said that she had something to tell her about his betrayal. In fact, exactly 10 days after she woke up in April, news came that her husband was due back at the motel. In a past life, when she met him, she asked him how he chewed, because she noticed that he had lost a lot of weight. But the guy replied that it didn't matter. Then, Bianca asked how things were going with his father, whether he was healthy, and whether everything had gone smoothly. The man replied that regardless of external circumstances, they had to go about their business, so he wanted to get down to business as soon as possible and not delay any longer. After this, Bogdan made love to his wife. She wanted him to stop, but the man said that now they needed a child, because the cage was broken. At that moment, he even said that something was needed to tie her legs, despite the fact that Bianca did not want all this. Of course he did not listen to her. He only did what was beneficial to him. In her past life, of course, she really wanted him to be on her side. No matter if it was love or not, she just wanted him to protect her, because his world was too cold and lonely for her. Every night after this happened, she cried bitterly and prayed that someone would save her from such a terrible fate. These memories captured the girl so much that she did not even understand how she could end up in confession, because as soon as she opened her eyes, she noticed that she was in that very place. Bianca burst into tears, and the man, smiling smugly, asked if she had really come again to confess, and of course, he was not against it. The girl was in a real panic. She did not understand what was happening and how she managed to find herself in that place. The space seemed to begin to narrow. It was hard for her to breathe. She realized that she couldn't breathe again because of this panic attack. She actually started coughing, and the man heard all of this and immediately panicked because he understood that this was not normal. Igor turned to the lady and said that it would be better for her to start breathing as calmly as possible. She needed to try to do this because it could only get worse. Then he extended his hand through the small window and told her to take his hand so that he could help her calm down. Bianca barely stood up. She continued to wheeze and cough, but she still came up and took his hand. Then the man asked her to try to breathe normally. She had to do it slowly and completely calmly. After a while, Bianca's breathing finally improved, and everything calmed down. The girl immediately thanked him for this and said that she felt much better. Yegor really calmed down after these words and said that it was very good. Of course, he had to find out what the matter was, So he asked what had happened that caused such a violent reaction in her. The girl then said in a quiet voice that she had seen a rather scary dream. The man immediately asked what it was like. He really cared. And Bianca replied that it was a dream, where she slept with a man who killed her family. She felt uneasy even though it was all just a dream. She was too stupid and pathetic to cling to it and call it pleasure. Drinking didn't really know what it was, and for this reason, even in that life, she thought that it was normal and everyone experienced it. I remember all this. The girl suddenly smiled and said that she was afraid that it could happen again in a dream, but the most important thing was that she realized that it was unreality, and this was the most important thing for her. Igor, having heard this, immediately thought about it. After a short silence, he asked what she thought about sleeping with someone other than her husband, with whom she had bad memories and associations. And the girl, hearing this, was very surprised. She asked if he really wanted to offer the services of a prostitute. Igor was surprised that she said that, and replied that the girl turned out to be quite extreme, but everything was much simpler. He said that she should have found a more elegant and experienced man, someone who would be much more handsome than her husband and more humane. A real pleasure, a strong feeling that would make her forget this unpleasant experience. This is exactly what could help in her situation. Bianca, having heard all this, immediately began to think. There was an awkward silence between them, so Yegor broke it and said that she was too depraved to be in church. The girl immediately answered him that she was a bit like that by nature, but he, in turn, was extremely immoral. Igor was amused by this. He immediately smiled and said something similar, which of course concerned her, the girl who was plotting to kill her husband. In the end, the place where they discussed it was also not the most correct, and as soon as Bianca thought about it, she realized that it was so. She did nothing wrong. She did not need to suffer alone. They stood there for a while and held each other's hands, and after a period of silence, the man decided to ask her one more time, just in case, whether she was serious about the services of a prostitute. Bianca said that she was actually serious, but she decided to follow the advice and find a partner for one night on Delgado Street. Igor immediately asked if she was joking when she said this. He really hoped that she was not serious, but the girl smiled and said that he had said that he wanted to know who she was, and said that if the Alvarado Hotel was looking for someone to play with fire, then it was her. Then, Yegor wondered if this meant that he should just wait for her there. He ran his fingers over her palm in order to attract her attention. Bianca immediately said that he didn't even know her face. It all sounded like a frivolous joke, so she wasn't going to take it all seriously. After that, she took her hand back. Her face was a little red from all this talk, so the girl said that she had to go. It was best to return to Mr. Pereira. At that moment, Jagger thought that since she knew this name, it meant that she knew who he was, so he asked her to wait. But it was too late. The drinking had already left the confessions and was walking quickly towards the exit. Only at that moment was she finally able to come to her senses a little. Having received news of her husband's imminent return, she suffered from terrible nightmares throughout the night. Finally, waking up at dawn, Bianca urgently sent anonymous letters to several newspapers. These letters exposed his betrayal, so they were very important. Olivia invited her husband to the hotel on the day of his arrival, and Bianca hoped that she would be lucky and he would spend the whole night there. The girl herself indicated the hotel room number in the revealing letter, and tomorrow morning, the hotel was supposed to be shaken by a huge scandal. Send in letters, Bianca felt definitely uneasy and very anxious, so she decided to run away from all these feelings to the church. That was how she found herself in the confessional. But the girl did not understand why she went there in the first place. And besides, she was very surprised by the fact that the man was there, and that day, she quickly began to go down the stairs, and suddenly noticed a small structure that was not far from her. Bianca thought about the fact that at the moment when the sun was supposed to go down, Bogdan should have already reached the hotel. The girl approached this structure because it was a special urn. She took off her ring and thought that she definitely had to divorce Bogdan and leave the estate. So without thinking twice, she simply threw her wedding ring into the bottom of this urn and left without hesitation, since in this way she would be completely free of this terrible man.